Well, Jim, our next question sent to CornyDriveThru at gmail.com from Liam in Kilkenny, Ireland.
They killed Kenny? Those bastards!
While watching the latest Dark Side of the Ring about Brian Pillman, I noticed that only mentioned Jim Ross and Vince McMahon attended his funeral. I find it hard to believe that no other wrestler from WCW or the WWF would have gone. I'm guessing it was a scheduling issue for both companies, but I find it inhumane if that's the case. Neither company would be kind enough to allow their wrestlers time off to mourn? Considering Owen Hart had a huge funeral with many wrestlers in attendance, why is it that Brian Pillman's funeral was a no-show, do you think?
Well, it wasn't a no-show. There were people from the wrestling industry and the periphery of the wrestling industry there. As Meltzer mentioned, he was there.
Am I wrong to think, do I remember, was Bobby Harmon there?
I'm sure he was.
Because of Cincinnati, right?
Cincinnati, yeah. And Les Thatcher. And so it was the WWE crew, I think, more specifically, that this guy's asking about. There were people from wrestling there. It happened on a Sunday. Back then, I can't reach my book. But back then, the guys were going from TV straight to house show tours. It wasn't like they just did TV and then were off. So literally there was a show every night. There were already shows booked that week. I assume everybody was booked. I bet you, well, I don't want to say that. I was going to say, I bet if somebody had asked specifically, if they could be off to go, that they would have been allowed to. But then was Steve Austin, probably at that point, was he in the main event of a show that already had a six-figure advance? Very possibly. Unless I saw everybody's schedule from 25 years ago and on that specific date, I can't cover for everybody. I don't know about WCW. I don't know who he would have been still close with down there and whether they would have let people off to come. I know that, it also, it wasn't the same as Owen because,
right.
I mean, and this was Brian, and the toxicology hadn't come in to find out that it was his heart. Was it an overdose? Is everybody going to want to take off and go to what may very well and probably was a pretty good sized media event in Cincinnati? On top, who knows?
Plus, Owen had been there. Owen had been there for years, and Brett was there, and a top star. Pillman had been there for, what, a year and a half?
Yeah, well, and also it happened to Owen at the show, right, in front of everybody. So they were all different things. Somebody's going to say, well, why didn't you go, Jim? Well, I don't do funerals. I think I've been to, I won't even say who it was, but I've only been to one funeral that I can think of in the last 25 years that was not a member of my family. And actually, the one I'm thinking about 25 years ago, I didn't go to his funeral. I went to the funeral home beforehand, was Dennis Coralluzzo.
Yeah, I went to the funeral. I went to that funeral.
I went to the funeral home the day before. But anyway, you were going to ask a question, but I'm just saying I don't know what everybody's mindset was. And as you know, that was in St. Louis, and then we were, I think, in Evansville, wherever. I was already back in Connecticut. What were you going to ask?
You kind of answered it. It was just the difference between Owen and Pillman in terms of Vince McMahon's relationship to them.
Yeah. And there was a high degree of oops on the part of the WWF office, obviously, at that point. So they wanted to do everything they could to show support in that situation. But, so I think that's what it was. It was just a variety of things and a variety of reasons, but it wasn't like the whole world of wrestling forsook it. Look at the Pillman memorial shows with all the guys that came when it was something that they knew was going to happen, and they could take time off, and they wouldn't be, leaving their various companies up in a lurch because that was a time where business was doing well. So there was a lot of tickets sold. But it wasn't that the wrestlers didn't care. It was just it was an odd time, an odd situation, a sudden thing.